This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 321 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend, good brother, and the man that operates our social media pages. It's Liam. Liam, it's a very exciting month here for the DCAU Review. It's technically an Elseworlds month because this is not a traditional DCAU show that we'll be reviewing this month, but it is something that we have been talking about for a very long time, and at last, this very week, thankfully, Jeffrey Bezos came through, as we all expected him to be the hero in the end. And we have a brand new Batman cartoon from Bruce Timm and James Tucker, amongst others, to discuss this very month.
That is right, Cal. We are here talking for the next few weeks about the brand new Batman Caped Crusader show. And without further ado, we have the very first episode of this series to talk about, that being In Treacherous Waters.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very exciting time for us, as we mentioned. We typically, on very rare occasions, I would say it's probably on one hand you can count the amount of times that we have reviewed relatively new material. We are a nostalgia podcast first, so
absolutely
we tend to steer away, with the exception of special occasions. We did Justice League versus the Fatal Five, which technically at this time is the last entry into the DCAU, unless you count the cameos that have since happened. But I
Space Jam 2. That's what we're all thinking about.
Of course. How could we forget? We have not covered that just yet, but you have threatened me numerous times to cover that. But yeah, we're excited to review this here. We're going to do our best to make sure that recency bias doesn't enter in as much as possible to our reviews here. We're going to try and look at this through the same critical lens that we do with every other episode, of course, just with the nostalgia removed. So maybe we'll be more honest in that case. So excited to do that. But in case we have some new listeners that are checking us out for the very first time because of your excitement of the new Batman Caped Crusader cartoon, just a review for you. We break down these episodes. We'll give our own plot synopsis for the episode where we kind of break down the ins and outs. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, I don't know why you would be listening to a review of it, but
spoiler alert.
Yes, this is your one and only warning that we will be talking in great detail each and every week about these episodes. So if for some reason you have not watched the first episode or any of the others as we go through the month, avoid this episode like the plague, or you will be subject to hearing plenty of spoilers. So we'll break down the plot, and then we also discuss animation, music, and then the voice actors as well, Liam. So we're gonna break those categories down. All four of those categories down, and give a score out of 10 for each of them, and then we finish the write up by just totaling all of our scores up, and we get a blank out of 40 basically for our final score there, giving us a 40 out of 40 would be perfect, a 0 out of 40 would be the worst thing we've ever seen. So I imagine this will probably land somewhere in between there, but excited to chat with you. And as is tradition, Liam, we of course, before we do our own synopsis, we have the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which of course is brought to you by the Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe, and you get our entire back catalog where we review Batman the Animated Series all the way up through Batman Beyond Justice League and Justice League Unlimited and everything in between. Not only that, but you get the podcast library of Tim Talk that reviewed every Batman cartoon and every DCAU cartoon as well as the ongoing podcasts from Jump on the Bat-Wagon, which is from our friends at Watchtower Database, all in one convenient streaming location for your listening pleasure. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe.
Absolutely. So this is the synopsis for In Treacherous Waters, which is written by Jace Ricci and Bruce Timm, directed by Christina Sada, with music by Frederik Wiedmann and animation by Studio IAM. And since, unlike most of the things we reviewed, there's a different voice director, I'm going to mention the voice direction by Gene Vassalaros.
Nice.
So, with all of that out of the way, that synopsis reads as such. Batman finds himself in the middle of a turf war between rival crime bosses Rupert Thorne and the Penguin when a series of explosions rocks Gotham.
Decent. I
Not
get
bad.
that. I get
That's a
that
blurb. That's a TV guide blurb. That gets you interested in what's going on for the rest of the episode.
Off to a hot start here with our Batman Caped Crusader IMDb synopsis. This is perhaps the excitement around this has allowed the professionals to step in to do their IMDb synopses. But yeah, we kick things off, Liam, with a very disturbing sequence where we have someone that's being grilled and being interrogated under some lights. We learn that this is a gentleman by the name of Clarence who's being threatened by some gang members. He's being accused of being a stool pigeon, pun intended. This other henchman named Iggy steps up and lets him know that they are well aware that Clarence has been spilling the beans to the authorities and perhaps even to Rupert Thorne himself, who is apparently a chief rival to whatever this gang is. And unfortunately, Clarence doesn't want to come clean with anything or is unable to come clean with anything, which leads our Heavy's Iggy and the rest of this gang to turn things over to the boss.
Iggy, tell me what's going on, please.
Someone in our outfit's been sharing secrets with Rupert Thorne. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Clarence?
What? You think it's me? Come on, Iggy, you and me, we go way back. You know I never do that.
Sure, Clarence. But the boss would like to have a word with you anyway.
No. Iggy, come on. Please, no! I don't know who told you I wasn't on the level, but you gotta believe me. I'd never... No!
You see a silhouette of a figure walk in with an umbrella and a monocle. So longtime Batman fans would know that this, of course, is Kite Man, of course. No, of course not. Of course not Kite Man. Very obviously, it is, of course, the Penguin, but we'll talk about the twist. There is a twist that comes with the Penguin here, a somewhat controversial question mark. Is it really? I don't think so, but enough YouTubers seem to think so that they've got some clicks out of it. So from there, we transition to a warehouse where we see some gangsters loading a whole bunch of boxes onto a box truck, and they're very clearly a little bit unnerved about some of the rumors about the recent takedowns of other gangs. A masked individual, and just as someone, of course, says that there's nothing to be afraid of, the lights go out, gas enters the room, and wouldn't you know it, it's
Kite Man. Oh no.
We're just waiting for him to show up. Hell
that
yeah.
That show's debuting too, by the way.
That's
soon.
Good.
So
yes.
Coming eventually, I'm sure, to this very podcast.
But yes, it is of course not Kite Man. It is the Dark Knight. It is Batman himself, and he very, very orderly and quickly takes out this group of gangsters one by one. And just as he and the gangsters have gotten out of the warehouse, an incoming explosion happens. We hear what sounds like perhaps a bomb dropping or a loud whistling, followed by an immediate explosion of this warehouse, and Batman is left sort of stroking his chin as to just what went down there. Once Batman starts putting the pieces together back at the Batcave, he's there with Alfred. He's putting the pieces together and recognizes that it's the third warehouse of Rupert Thorne's to be hit.
3 explosions in 2 weeks. All 3 buildings can be traced to shadow companies operated by Rupert Thorne.
The police ruled the first explosion a gas leak. The second, an accidental electrical fire.
Someone's declared war on Thorne, but they're covering their tracks, being smart about it.
That would suggest there's a crime boss we don't know about. One who's bold enough to take on Rupert Thorne. But if that's the case, we could be looking at
an all-out gang war on the streets of Gotham.
Good Lord.
I need to find out who's behind these explosions, and I know where to start looking for them.
Police headquarters? You think someone inside the department is covering up these explosions?
It's Gotham, Pennyworth. Does the corruption really surprise you?
This Batman clearly knows not to believe in coincidences. Alfred reports that the series of claims appear to be an electrical malfunction as well as some other happenstance, but Batman is not willing to take this on the surface level. So decides to do a little bit of investigating of his own, and that's we cut to our next scene, which is taking place in a courtroom where we are introduced to Barbara Gordon, who is a public defender in this version of Gotham City, and she's going up against a very handsome debonair district attorney who many of us would probably recognize as not Kite Man either, Harvey Dent. There is no Kite Man, all right? Let's just get that out of the way here. So far. Harvey Dent is there, and there's a young man that's on trial. It's very clear that he was involved in some sort of gang activity, but was a very low-level member of the gang. And we get a recess for the jury to decide this young man's fate. Barbara then goes over to Harvey Dent and says that they're really being way too hard on this guy. Harvey says, well, if he was willing to flip on his bosses, then maybe he would have looked the other way or been a little bit easier on him. But if not, he's got to put the foot down. And we kind of get the introduction here, which we knew a little bit by reading interviews with James Tucker and Bruce Timm, Liam. But this Harvey Dent is very different in the way that he is not the good guy fighting on the side of good that appears to get caught up and turn bad. It appears that he's kind of already a little bit selfish and has his own self-interests in mind, including political aspirations for a mayoral candidacy.
Yeah, this version of Harvey a little bit slimier than maybe than what we're used to when it comes to a pre-Two-Face version. I think that was something the creators talked about pre the show debuting, but it still kind of caught me off guard in action when you see him just walk up being all smarmy. But yes, he's very full of himself and is not afraid to all but say in those exact words that when he's the mayor, he's going to keep a list of who is and isn't good to him or respectful of him, and that's how he'll choose who does or doesn't get promotions, whether that be in the police department or perhaps how difficult he will make the life of someone like Barbara Gordon, or as we find out a little bit later, perhaps her father, the police commissioner. But we transition there to this is where we're on the yacht, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Transition there to the Iceberg Lounge, but like many things with familiar names that are in this show, it's got a little bit of a twist. It isn't just a restaurant, nor is it like an actual giant iceberg like it is in the comics sometimes, I think. It is in fact a yacht, a cruise ship, and it's apparently the location for a police soiree, a fundraiser that's being hosted by the owner of this yacht, none other than the as aforementioned Penguin. But Cal, you already hinted at it. This Penguin's a little bit different. In fact, it is a woman, Oswalda Cobblepot, as we find out throughout the course of the episode. And we are treated to a little bit of a song, as she's a little bit of a show woman. It's very clear. And after she charms a lot of the police in the room, it's very clear that she is holds a lot of power and wields a lot of influence immediately in this area.
Oh, thank you. Hello. If it isn't Detective Arnold Flass, sugar. You can frisk me any day of the week.
Hey, me next! Do me next!
Not if you were the last cop on the force, Bullock. Mwah! 23 skidoo. I bid you adieu.
And Bruce Wayne decides he's going to crash the party, so to speak. I love that Alfred and him are just riding up in a speedboat. Like, there's not any. I guess you could just do that. It was the 1930s. You could just
Right.
do that.
Right.
And he's rich, and a famous rich guy, as we established. And it becomes clear immediately that this version of Bruce Wayne does not really seem concerned with appearing altruistic or like much of a good guy, and is very much playing up the more swanky jet-setting billionaire as he walks into the party, makes some small talk with some of the other guests, including Harvey Dent, who we see.
He also
And,
belittles Oswalda's two sons.
Oh, it's Bruce Wayne.
Well, this is embarrassing. You started the party without me.
You made it, Bruce.
And so did you.
It's Aaron. This is my mama's party.
Well, that's swell. Say, Alan, be a pal and find a spot for these.
Bruce! Late as always. What was the problem this time?
Harvey, the only problem is that you and I are at a party, and neither of us has a drink.
He forgets the one's name immediately. Just like it's so funny. He's so excited that Bruce Wayne is there and expects Bruce Wayne to know who he is. And then when he doesn't, he's very crestfallen, but then sort of like tries to make up for it by reintroducing himself, only for Bruce to turn around and immediately call him the wrong name, like the sentence after he introduces himself.
Yeah, it's pretty great. We get this introduction, as you mentioned, of the two Cobblepot kids, Aaron and Ronald, that are kind of these bumbling oafs, not really don't seem to be too active in their mom's criminal empire in any sort of important way. They sort of one of them sort of makes a fool of himself in front of Barbara Gordon as he's trying to be a little flirty as Bruce arrives as well. So it's established that these are just kind of these argumentative goofballs that are walking around, and then yes, they immediately get sunned by Bruce Wayne's arrival. And as we head inside, there's another brief conversation, I believe, here between Harvey Dent and Commissioner Gordon, who is appreciative of Barbara accompanying him, even though neither of them really seem to want to be there, as they're two of the only people that aren't interested in being on the payroll of the Penguin or Harvey Dent, or one of the Penguin's other esteemed guests, as here we are introduced to none other than Rupert Thorne, who it's very clear that Thorne and Penguin know exactly who the other one is and what's been going on. Penguin makes a few remarks about how she's just thankful that Thorne wasn't in the office he had at one of the warehouses, or else he could have been blown into tiny little bits.
Mm-hmm.
And Rupert Thorne responds by, he takes it on the chin, and then he returns fire by suggesting that the reason he wasn't in his office that night that the bomb went off is because someone alerted him to it, and he implies that it is Oswalda's younger son, Aaron.
Rupert Thorne, what a lovely surprise. I didn't expect you to show.
I wouldn't miss it. Supporting local law enforcement is our civic duty.
True. So true. I must say, I was devastated to hear another of your properties exploded the other night. Did I hear you had an office in that building? Heavens! If you'd been there, why, you would have been blown to pieces. Itty-bitty pieces.
Actually, Oswalda, I was there. Lucky for me. I got a tip and hightailed it out of there just in time.
Oh? A tip, you say?
Indeed. You might say a little birdie told me. Itty-bitty birdie.
So at that point, it's clear that Penguin's got some cleaning up to do in her organization. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne has slipped away and decides to go make his way into the cargo hold, where he finds quite a few ill-gotten gains, some white powdery substances. Not quite sure what that was, but as he inspects it, he hears a little bit of a commotion, and he hears the Penguin's voice. Thankfully, there's like a little. Is this a common thing on ships? This is me showing my ignorance for never having been on like a big ship like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's just like a little rectangle cut out in the cargo hold where you can dive into the water.
I don't know. I don't know if that's common. I don't know. I also have not been in.
Like, is it like a trapdoor?
Many ships.
Yeah. That's our action item for the week. Someone tell me if this is a thing that's on cruise ships somewhere, so you can add us at DCAU review on Twitter or Instagram and let us know if this is a real thing or not. But Bruce makes his escape through the hatch thing, and as we get inside, it's become clear that just without much compulsion, Oswaldo doesn't seem to be having any trouble believing that Aaron has in fact sold her out, and she goes about righting that wrong in a very dramatic way.
So, how much you figure we cleared off all these dumb coppers anyway?
The exact amount almost doesn't matter, darling. Embezzling thousands from Gotham's finest right under their stupid noses is a treasure in and of itself. But I'll tell you what made tonight truly unforgettable. It was learning that one of my sweet, precious little angels sold me out.
Wait, what? No, Mama, we never. It was Aaron. It had to be him. What? Come on, Ronnie's the one who's always saying crap behind your back. Lousy buckets and snotbags having rat.
I ought to break your neck.
Boys, please. Mama already knows which one of you it is.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk a little bit about it here in visuals in just a second, but there is a checklist of things that we go through here that the original Batman the Animated Series was not allowed to do, that we see repeatedly done in this episode, just as if to say, as Bruce Timm once said, more Batman the Animated Series than Batman the Animated Series, as he once said. But yep, she kills him immediately. There's a bit of a argument between the two brothers, and immediately Ronnie tells Oswaldo that it was Aaron. Aaron insists it was not him. He didn't do it. It appears that Oswaldo is going to forgive him initially, but then she kills him. She boxes him up, throws him in the water, and we never see him again. She drowns him alive in a box.
We see, not to jump ahead, this is more of a visual note, but when the Bat sub is seen later, there is a suitcase with a skeleton in it that you see in the foreground as the Bat boat is riding by. Maybe that's not him. Maybe that's just this doesn't seem like the first time she's done something like this. So maybe the implication is more that she's doing this all the time, and so there's the Gotham Harbor is littered with suitcase skeletons.
Very possible.
But, yeah, it does not appear that that young Aaron made his way out of the confinement there.
That's right.
And,
yep. So after she does away with her son Aaron, she makes it very clear to her other heavy Iggy that things have to be tied up and they have to keep moving on with what their plans are. A very nervous Aaron finds himself, or I'm sorry, very nervous Ronnie finds himself at this point terrified of his mom, looking for any way out. So we get a visual of a phone call that he makes to Rupert Thorne, trying to switch sides, saying that he wants to join Thorne's team. Thorne ironically thanks him for being willing to sell his mom up the river, but because he was a stool pigeon, he's not interested in adding somebody like that to his team, and wishes him the best of luck before hanging up, leaving old Ronnie very, very nervous about where to turn to next. So all he knows to do at this point is to head back to police headquarters, and where he finds Barbara Gordon there late at night, and he explains the entire situation to Barbara what's going on, and says that she needs to help him get out of there and figure out something. So they make their way out to the car in an attempt to try and get him someplace safe. But as they do and are driving away, they notice in the rearview mirror a very fancy looking car pulls up behind them and is clearly following them. Immediately following that, a pair of gentlemen with Tommy guns stick their heads out the windows, and a shootout begins as they begin firing heavily with their machine guns on Barbara's car as she's attempting to escape. A chase is ensuing in Gotham. It's at this point that Barbara tells Ronnie to take the wheel, as we see that Barbara is no slouch or pushover, just because you may not think of your typical public defender. Of course, they're doing valiant work on their own by trying to free innocent people and working for dirt cheap, not that private lawyer money, but you don't think of a public defender as the most able person to defend themselves, but Barbara very clearly here, a chip off her dad's block, as she is very formidable. She pulls out her own pistol and fires back as Ronnie takes the wheel. They chase them down an alley where they're stuck, and it appears that they're boxed in at this point. And Ronnie and Barbara do their best to take cover. Barbara has one single bullet left in her revolver, and she pulls it out, ready to go to war. But wouldn't you know it, just in time, pulling up and absolutely decimating the Penguin's men with his car is Batman. And he does sort of like a classic tail whip. I guess you could explain it was sort of slowing down, but it feels like he's going about 80 miles an hour and just smashes into these three guys.
Yeah, I think the phrase used on another animated Batman project would be street pizza here.
Yeah.
Or sidewalk stroganoff, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah, these guys feels like they should be splatted, but I think they were just knocked out.
They were, I would say they were in critical condition at
Yes.
Gotham City Hospital. But yeah, so we get this moment where Barbara is surprised. We see the silhouette of Batman peering through the window. He gives her a gentle nod and then speeds off. And remember, at this point, Batman is mostly just rumors, and there haven't been actual visual sightings of him. So this is Barbara's first time encountering him, and we see that she's also heard from her dad. And of course, the other cops on the force that Batman is out there. But in the midst of this, Batman is attempting to figure out. We didn't talk about it. There was an interrogation scene where Batman interrogated the fire investigator, got the information out that way.
Crap. Help! Help me! Someone!
Who's behind those explosions?
Oh, God! Who? What are you?
3 buildings blown to pieces. You falsified the reports. Who paid you?
Are you crazy? Pull me up!
Give me a name.
Just pull me up! Oh, God! Hurry, please!
I won't ask again.
It was a penguin! It was a freaking penguin! Oh, God. Oh, my God.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
We're back at police headquarters trying to strategize. He's telling both Barbara and her dad that they need to get someplace safe, that nowhere is safe right now. He's trying to spill the beans to them, but they're kind of putting all of the information together at once, as we then hear and realize that the reason why he's afraid of his mom so much is because she has acquired a cannon, her own custom retrofitted cannon that she has placed on the top of the Iceberg Lounge, and it is this that she's using to target each of Rupert Thorne's locations that have been mysteriously been exploding. So he's afraid that she is now out for him, knows that he's going to be killed, because at this point we learn a little bit more about this universe's version of Harvey Bullock. He teams up an Aaron Flass or Arnold Flass, and Arnold Flass and him are clearly portrayed as very crooked cops in this universe, and they're actually informants for Penguin. Gives her the information that Ronnie is at the police station and is ready to squeal, and she thanks them and says that she's not gonna allow this to throw a wrench into her plans. So they got to deal with Ronnie and the police all in one fell swoop. So it's at this point that it's kind of a race against time at this point, as Ronnie and gives both Gordons the news that, she's going to blow up the police station if you guys don't hurry up and evacuate. So we got to get everybody out of here. And that's where we cut to Batman, who has put the pieces together and realized that he's got to go back and take on Penguin at this point. So he's in the Bat Sub. Love the Bat Sub. We even get the little boom, boom, sonar sound effect.
Or sonar, yeah.
As he's going through the harbor. And it's here where we're going to ultimately culminate in our battle. It's Batman racing to get to the Iceberg Lounge to stop the Penguin racing to the roof to launch the cannon, and the police attempting their best to evacuate GCPD all at the same time, which leads to our third and final, very exciting act.
That's right. So Batman arrives and has some fisticuffs with not only Iggy, but this Penguin is not exactly afraid to get her own hands dirty either, and launches her own physical attack on Batman. Something, and we'll probably talk more about this in visuals as well. This Batman is not the punch a guy once and he's just flies backwards type of Batman. Like he has a little bit more of a struggle dealing with these two very capable people. He has some gadgets to help him out. And as Batman battles the Penguin and Iggy, he seemingly has the upper hand. He throws a batarang that blocks her from pulling the lever that will fire the shot from the cannon, but she's actually able to kind of outsmart him and sort of kick it forward anyway and set it off. So the police department does get bombed, and thankfully everyone is able to escape. Even the we'll just say lady of the evening that was apparently handcuffed to Harvey Bullock's desk that he left for dead, but that Barbara thankfully notices and frees right before the bomb hits. But yes, Barbara and the rest are able to escape just as it explodes. And Batman's able to finally disarm the Penguin and break her umbrella knife, and finally put the cuffs on her right as the cops. Right, of course, now the cops show up on their boats trying to get involved, but at this point, seemingly, Penguin thinks both she and Batman will be caught, but she turns around, and of course, what else is going to happen? He's gone. So the Penguin is captured, and seemingly all is right in the world. But we have one final scene with Batman, and first we cut back to sort of the wreckage of the police department, where Barbara and Gordon and Jim Gordon compare notes, and she discusses that in fact she has met the Batman for the first time, and that she finds him intriguing, to say the least, but not in that way.
Not in a romantic way.
Not in the way that people get weird and mad about, just to be clear.
Yep.
But yes, and then we cut to one final scene back in the Bat Cave, where Batman and Alfred are sort of puzzling over what is left after this new crime boss to seemingly be put down.
Since you refuse to sleep, Master Bruce, I insist you at least eat.
I've been piecing together the full extent of Penguin's empire.
Former empire, you mean?
Yes, and that's the problem. Penguin was keeping Thorne's mob in check by taking down her operation in one fell swoop.
You've just given another piece of the city to Rupert Thorne.
I failed tonight. That can't happen again.
Batman comes to the realization that really all he's done by putting the Penguin out of business is allowed the elusive and mysterious Rupert Thorne to expand his own empire and take over all of the territory that the Penguin had been taking for herself. So while he may have put one criminal behind bars, he's allowed another one to grow even stronger and more dangerous. And he remarks to Alfred that he has failed in his crusade tonight, and that it can't ever happen again, as we fade to black.
Absolutely. What an interesting introduction here to this show. A couple of things that I noticed, and I think maybe if I hadn't read articles from the creators, I may have been a negative for me. I'll start with that. They made it very clear that this show was almost more about the supporting cast than it was Batman himself. And this
Sure.
episode, and full transparency, at the time of recording this episode, I've listened to, or I've read, or I've watched the first 5 episodes of the show. So I can say that they do a good job of trying to flesh out some of these supporting casts, which makes sense, especially in the way that the show is kind of being done, and you're going to have a second season already that you know. So why not go ahead and try and get the people invested in these characters? So there's not as much Batman as you would expect in the very first episode of a Batman show. You're also dropping all 10 episodes at the same time, so it also doesn't necessarily feel like you have a lack of Batman, because for this episode, not having as much Batman to rely on, you then pick right back up on the next episode and you get more Batman and continue that. So that was intentional. I know they're trying to make this Batman very mysterious and not really, almost inhuman in a way, I think is how they described it. He's weird is how that is another way that they described it. The word of the week, weird. He's a weird guy. So I think that they were effective in doing that. So knowing what the producers were going for, I think this episode is written to fit that. Of course, we're going to look at this through a comparison lens to Batman the Animated Series because of what we do and our appreciation for that. And that's what this whole podcast was based on. And Bruce Timm has already done the comparison himself. So I think it's fair to compare to that. As far as an entry point to the show, I think it's on par for an episode like On Leather Wings, where you're dropped right in the middle of everything. We don't have to give a backstory of who Batman is. It's not an origin story, and that feels good because we don't need that. We don't need a Batman origin to figure out who he is. That being said, some of his origin is certainly touched on some of the other episodes, but this one we didn't have to see his parents getting shot for this episode. So good. It is just kind of, you do set up the world that like this is gangsters, this is crime families, people battling for power in a very corrupt city. Your police force is corrupt with the exception of Commissioner Gordon. Even the people that are on quote unquote good have ulterior motives for the most part, with Harvey Dent really only trying to advance his own political careers. So and because Batman's not just like a straight up good guy, as like it feels like there are shades of gray to most of the characters, which is very interesting.
Absolutely.
As far as the plot for the episode goes, it's fine. I didn't have a problem with changing Penguin to a woman. It doesn't feel like it needs to be that controversial. None of the talking points that people that would accuse this of being woke or whatever pejorative, inflammatory language that you would prefer to use, there's none of those controversial things are involved with. They just chose to make Penguin a woman. That's okay. That's quite all right. I think
that's the thing to me. And I know her voice actress, who we'll talk about a little bit later, mentioned that, like, the character and a lot of media is portrayed almost more as a creature anyway. Like it's not a lot of like gendered stuff about the Penguin besides, or I would say like the gimmick is the bird stuff, like, and maybe that they're like a squat, like more heavy set person.
Right.
Beyond that, like, I don't think there's a lot of like, especially again for a brand new show. Now, if this was a, a reboot of the original animated series and suddenly Penguin was a woman with no explanation, then yeah, sure, I would like an explanation for that. Or, same thing if Penguin showed up in a comic and it was like, oh no, this is just how it's always been. Yeah, that would be weird. But it's like, it's a new show, it's a new universe. Penguin happens to be a woman instead of a man. It doesn't
right.
and it allows, as we'll talk about, for a interesting performance from a very, very accomplished actor in her own right, which we'll talk about a little bit. So yeah, the idea that became like any sort of lightning rod for controversy. I mean, all of those we really try to avoid touching on this stuff too often. All of that world of angry people, mostly dudes, shrieking into their webcams about how this show has ruined the character or is spitting on the legacy. Most of that stuff I just find bewildering anyway, but especially in this one, because I'm like, what? It's a new show. They're different. The characters are always different when you do a new version of the thing. It's just,
I would almost understand it if this was like A tier Batman villain. I don't consider Penguin A tier Batman villain. Like it just like the greatest stories that have ever been told about Batman. I can't think of too many that involve the Penguin that I would go like, yeah, that's a story.
A massive role. Yeah,
like not as the main focus.
Right.
Which is okay. He's a supporting role most of the time. So making the Penguin a woman that's also a mob boss, I think it allows for this kooky interaction with her sons. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
The idea that she's a mob boss, but she's also like this club owner that's trying to be, Judy Garland or something, or somebody.
Yeah, she's like a hobnobber. Like she's like a celebrity within the city, in addition to being this mover and shaker in the crime world too.
Right, and she's I like that aspect of it. I don't think the story itself. I feel like it was pretty basic. You have these two people that are fighting over territory. She has a gigantic weapon. She's going to blow up the city with it. Batman has to stop the giant cannon. Doesn't stop the giant cannon, actually, but takes down the villain. I think the best part, the nuanced part of the fact that he feels like, even though he won the battle, quote unquote, by taking down the Penguin and her being taken into custody, he failed because it opens up Gotham to potentially more damage and more crime, more fighting, more battling, stuff like that between gangs. So and really strengthens this even more shadowy, less overtly bad crime boss. So I think that part of it was interesting enough. I didn't have too much that I hated. I didn't have anything that I can remember that I hated about the episode. I think it was paced pretty well. So I ended up settling on a 7 out of 10 for my plot. I think it's a good introduction to the show. By the time the episode was done, I was like, that was good. I'm interested in seeing what the next episode has to offer. So I don't know if that's supposed to be what it does. Like, it leaves you wanting more. But it was a good appetizer, I think, is how I'd probably define it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things I like about this episode. As far as things that really make this Penguin a point of difference, you already mentioned that she has this sort of lounge singer, sort of, local celebrity edge. And also I just think she's more like, this Penguin is more overtly sinister. I feel like the ways that Penguin are normally played in things are either he's just one of any number of mob bosses in the city. He just happens to be short and have a big nose. And he's not particularly interesting as a character. Or it's like they go for something evoking the Danny DeVito version, and he's like a freak with sharp teeth who eats raw fish and stuff. So this version being like, not only being, yes, she's a mob boss, but she is a much more imposing and serious threat. To where she is trying to kind of come at this kingpin that we don't get much of in this episode, but they obviously set up that he is, they set up that Thorne is going to be a player in this series by showing, one, how seemingly unbothered he is by how she's already taken these shots, And then when he does find out that his informant is about to be found out, he just says, "All right, fine, she's gonna kill you. Bye." You introduce some interesting elements of like who Rupert Thorne's gonna be in this show, that are fun. This episode has a lot of exposition. It's a very exposition heavy episode. And it kind of has to be because obviously, with the exception of Batman, who, as you mentioned, he just kind of shows up and starts punching guys, and then you see him investigating throughout the episode. Everybody else, you're doing pretty different versions of these characters other than Batman and Alfred. So you have to spend a lot of time establishing that this version of Barbara Gordon is a district attorney and sort of what her view on the way the city is right now, and the way that, Jim Gordon looks at the city, and how, having him as her father has influenced her. We have to introduce Harvey Dent as this sort of slimy DA who's running for mayor. You have to introduce some of the other cops that are corrupt, as we find out, and who are taking bribes and working both sides. You introduce your villain, your main villain in Penguin, and you have to have her be, terrifying and sinister. And they do a good job of that. But because you have so many characters, so much of the supporting cast, which, as you mentioned, will get probably more of a chance to flourish individually as the rest of the season goes on, it does feel a little dry, a little clunky at points, just because so much of the dialogue has to be focused on telling you information about, yes, this is Harvey Dent, but he's a D-bag right now instead of after he becomes Two-Face. Like, you have to introduce the character and then give everyone like 30 seconds to establish what their deal is in this new universe. So it has a lot of heavy lifting. I think that does result in kind of an uneven episode. And then, yes, the ending just being the Penguin has a giant cannon and she's going to fire it at the police headquarters. It's like, okay. I mean, it was a good fake out in the sense that, and we'll talk about this more in visuals, when she walks out and you see a giant umbrella, I thought it was going to be the thing from the Adam West show, and she was going to get on that thing and fly. And I don't know how I would have reacted if that's what they had done instead. But when she pulls it off and it's just a tarp for the cannon, I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty good gag. But so there's stuff about it I liked. I liked that, like I said, this Batman is very like, he's not magic. He's not like a magic ninja. Like in the scene where he goes into the police headquarters to find the file so he can go track down the fire inspector. He's just like in the room and he's just like inching his way around this support beam to hide from, I think it's Montoya putting the file away or whatever.
Yeah.
And she very nearly catches him. He's just like scooting, like inching away he's not great at this yet. It feels like he's still kind of learning and still fallible. You see that again, I think, when he's fighting the big thug on top of the sub, and then the Penguin herself. Like he's kind of relying on those gadgets, and when it's more of a straight up fight, he isn't just like a master that can just, defeat anyone in 2 shots or whatever. So I like seeing Batman kind of struggle a little bit more and make him feel a little bit more vulnerable and more fallible. So there are a lot of elements of this I like, but like I said, it's just so much of this has to come down to just introducing who all the players are. And again, that this episode is here in service of the other 9 who don't now have to do this. So I think in the long run, I can appreciate why they said, let's just front load all of it and just let some of the other episodes more focus just directly on the villain or directly on whatever the conflict of the episode is. So I don't think this is disagreement alarm worthy. I gave it a 5 out of 10. I think it's a fine, solid job for an opening episode. I do agree that little ending with Batman and Alfred sort of puzzling out that the story is just beginning is a pretty good little hook for what's coming next, and with the angle of Barbara and I keep doing that, Barbara and Jim trying to sort of suss out whether or not they can trust this Bat character, and Batman himself trying to figure out exactly what his next move should be. There's fun pieces here, and the overall atmosphere is a lot of fun, but the actual episode itself, like I said, it's so weighed down by exposition and explanation that by the time we get to the end, it's just Penguin's on a sub and she's going to shoot the. She got a big cannon. I was like, oh, all right. I guess we needed Batman to have a big fight at the end. So, yeah, it's solid. It does what it's asked of, but I didn't love it as like a pilot, like big statement episode. I didn't think it necessarily hit a home run, but they made solid contact.
There you go. A single, maybe a single with a stolen base of second or something.
There you go.
All right, Liam. Well, that will lead us to our second category of the day, which is animation and visuals. And I believe you said, was it studio? I tried to write it down. Studio IAM.
Yeah, I don't know, or IAM, perhaps. Yeah, okay. I believe it's but it is the letters IAM. So it's a Korean studio from what I could see. They've worked on a lot of recent Warner Brothers stuff, either directly or through subcontracting. They've worked on the Harley Quinn show. They've worked on several of the animated DC features. I think they worked on the last season of Young Justice as well. So seems like one of the sort of stock Warner Brothers animation studios. Obviously, even though this is an Amazon's Prime show, as people may remember, this was originally produced in-house at Warner Brothers for the purposes of airing it on HBO Max, and then something happened. Who can remember? And now it's on Prime. But yeah, so it still is an in-house production by WB here, and that's the studio that got used. And our director is Christina Sada. Apologies if I'm butchering that. She has worked not only as a storyboard artist, but also a director on several of the, speaking of him, James Tuckerverse animated direct-to-video movies like the Justice League Dark, Apocalypse War, and several of those as well. She was the director of that one. So an old compatriot of James Tucker along for the ride here.
There you go. And speaking of Mr. Tucker, if you're interested in hearing our thoughts on the actual look of the entire show, and we kind of covered that, I think, in the bonus episode where we broke down the trailer and kind of how things looked. We'll put
a link to that in our description if you are interested in checking that out if you're a new listener.
Yeah, I was going to say, just for the sake of time, as far as the overall look of the episode, it's we know that Mr. Tucker was responsible for the main character design, like he's lead character designer, and then there were some pretty familiar names that worked with him, some artists that have worked in and around DC projects before that were also responsible as well. But as far as the overall look, it is obviously very, very, very influenced by Bruce Timm's art style and the way that he draws characters. And I think watching the episodes, I think it reminds me, if you pull up the first pitch that Bruce did for the Batman the Animated Series way back when, there's like a lost little bit that eventually they changed around and reanimated and was essentially the opening sequence for the title, for the opening credits for the show. The battle on the rooftop, Batman fighting gangsters and punching. It's very much Fleischer Superman. There's like it's a little bit more Disney as far as the way that some of the characters are emote, I would say. But it's still very, very on brand for Bruce Timm, square jaws, Jack Kirby inspired kind of facial features and line work. And that's pretty much the look of the show. And I think it works well for what we're going with here. It feels new, but comfortable, which is what I think this is probably going to be a theme of what this show ultimately looks like. But as far as the animation would go overall, before we highlight the animation itself, I think what stood out to me is that there are, it's going to sound like I'm crapping on it, but like I think there are more shortcuts that they take now so that they don't have to animate as much. One of the things I noticed when a person might close a door, but it's only shown from the chest up, so it's implied that they're closing the door, but you don't show them actually closing the door with their arm, so you don't actually seemingly have to animate that, if that makes sense. Like there's more stuff implied versus actually shown when it comes to the animation. Characters move a little bit differently than traditional animation. This is hand-drawn. We did learn that most of the animation is hand-drawn with the exception of the cars and the boats and everything, which are CGI with overlays. But it is hand-drawn, but it's hand-drawn digital animation. So it's a little bit different than the classic BTOS episodes. So things don't move quite as smoothly from what I see. And sometimes that can stand out if you're being super critical of what's happening on the screen. That's my general overview of like the animation style and my like bird's eye view of this episode and maybe how the animation is going forward. Any thoughts on the animation studio, the overall style, Liam?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we've already kind of touched on a lot of the character designs. Love a lot of those. I love how it feels. It certainly evokes the original series without just being a carbon copy. As far as the animation, that is something that I feel I noticed in. You can tell there is extra attention put on the flashier action sequences. That first one in the warehouse where Batman's coming out of the smoke, that's really fluid and looks really good. And the fight at the end is the same way. But yeah, I think, and a lot of this, and this is not exclusive to animation in this day and age, but a lot of it just comes down to, I'm sure, time and budget. And so a lot of the scenes where it's just like two people talking to each other, they're not really moving. Like they're not really there other than their mouths.
Right.
There's just not they feel a little stiff. Like there's the same bit right before the action kicks off in that warehouse where the two guys are talking about the Batman and whether he's real or not. It's like the one guy, like you can hear in the inflection of the actor's voice that his emotion is kind of changing but the facial expression doesn't really change. Like maybe the eyes move a little bit, so he's kind of looking at him, and the mouth is moving obviously, but it's very it kind of in that way, even though it doesn't aesthetically look like Eastern animation, that does feel like a lot of the times if you watch that where yes, the scenes where it's just two people talking or people exchanging dialogue can be very under animated. Again, probably a budgetary thing and a time thing, but it does create a little bit of it's noticeable. It's noticeable, I think, if you could, especially if you're comparing it to these original hand-drawn series. But again, and it is worth pointing out, as we have many times before, like that thing, that era of animation, the 90s Warner Brothers animation, that is kind of a unicorn.
Yeah.
Like, and like the amount of money that was being spent, the amount of time that was being taken, that was not the norm in children's animation, especially at that time. So it is hard to compare anything, especially modern things. As you said, it's a different medium with the digital animation. It doesn't mean people aren't working as hard or that they're intentionally cutting corners because they're lazy. It's a different process. And again, time and budget is probably what it comes down to. But I do agree that it's noticeable, especially I think in a lot of dialogue scenes.
It's just a little stiff.
yeah. It's not and I think once you settle into it, it's not a problem. But if you're coming right off an episode of Batman the Animated Series and you go into this show, you will feel the difference. But again, it's like I said, it's not good nor bad. It's just kind of part of the process now. So it's noticeable. But that being said, I do think there are moments where I think some of the dialogue really hits. The scene between Penguin and Thorn, I think, is done really well. Like that has really good atmosphere. That feels like, even though it's a weird bird lady with a monocle and a top hat talking to Marlon Brando from The Godfather. Like it still feels very atmospheric. Like it still feels like a mafia movie or something. Like it doesn't feel silly at any point. I do like the kind of the bits of Batman walking around and sort of puzzling things out with Alfred in the Bat Cave. It's again, this is as mentioned a period piece, so there's no traditional Bat computer or things for him to work out. He has like a big glass board with a map of the city on it, and he's like writing on it with chalk and stuff. And so some of the ways that he's sort of puzzling out different locations and what's been happening and is kind of fun. And then obviously where the show's going to stand out beyond the character designs, which we've already talked about, is the big action beats. I already kind of mentioned I love the giant umbrella gag with the cannon. I genuinely thought I think it's in the movie, the Adam West Burt Ward 66 Batman movie where Penguin and Joker and everyone are riding on giant flying umbrellas, and they all have like Robin Hood masks or Lone Ranger masks on for some reason. Which I've never understood, but it's a great gag. So I genuinely thought that's what was going to happen, and it's a great little fake out when she pulls it off and it's just a tarp. Love the vehicle designs. The Batmobile and the aforementioned Bat Sub, the Iceberg Lounge again being like this floating yacht in the middle of the harbor is kind of a fun little change. There's a lot of aesthetic things. I feel like I'm jumping around a lot, but I think as far as standout beats, yes, you have your opening action beat with where you're introduced to Batman and the explosion that follows that at the warehouse. And then you have your final beat where he's fighting them on the sub, and then the big explosion at the police department. I do love that little, even though again I think it was in the trailers, that opening bit where the guy is being interrogated for squealing on or snitching on the Penguin to Thorne, and then the lights shut off and you just see the silhouette of the Penguin, and the umbrella with the knife sort of just pops into frame. I was like, that's really neat. That's really neat.
Yeah,
again, she just feels sinister in a way or dangerous in a way that a lot of Penguins I don't think do.
Yeah, and I almost wish so much of I understand it's modern culture. You got to rev up excitement around things by showing as much as you possibly can without spoiling everything. But it feels so much these days is given away in trailers and little featurettes. And there were so many that were leading up to this. And it's obviously my decision to watch them, but they're putting them out there. And the fact that you could not escape the Penguin reveal as a woman, but how cool would that have been to watch that in real time? You see the silhouette and then they reveal a scene and a half later that, it was a fake out. It's not your traditional Penguin. It's a woman. Or maybe
to your point, it is kind of held as a reveal until about halfway through the second act.
Right.
Like, when even when she walks out on stage, it's still kind of in silhouette for a moment, and then she steps out into the light and you see it. So they definitely narratively it feels like it's supposed to be a little bit, a revelation that not only is established Batman villain Penguin as a woman, but also like just this new tough crime boss that's moving in on Thorne's territory as a woman. Like this should be a big deal. But it's like, well, actually we knew because like the screenshots have been all over Twitter for a week, and then they put out their own little featurette on it. So
yeah, I kind of wish they hadn't spoiled as much as they did. But again, it's modern media, so of course they're going to do that to try and drum up some excitement. But
of course,
thoughts on we didn't really cover it yet, but the opening credits. That was speaking of things that they spoiled on the internet 2 days before the actual series premiere. We got the opening credit sequence, which essentially is a mishmash of different clips from the show, but they have edited them to put them completely in this like sepia toned monochromatic coloration with this filter over it that really gives it that dark deco feel from BTOS. And I know one of the artists, I believe it was Mauricio Abril, who I know he was part of the or Abril, apologies if I'm butchering that, but I know he worked on the opening sequence, and I think he was credited by one of the other people that worked on the show as trying to replicate that dark deco feel. I like it. I kind of wish that it had. I mean, I always feel like when a show gets its own animated sequence that isn't just clips from the show, it just stands out a little bit more. But I like that they didn't. It's not just a compilation of the clips from the episode that you're watching, or they at least kind of changed it up, and then you have the original, the first thing that we ever got when it came to this, the first poster that Bruce Timm drew ends up coming in as sort of like the last thing that you see at the end of the credits.
Yeah, I like it. It looks like most of it's all, as you mentioned, it's all in black and white. All the clips appear to be clips from episodes mostly, at least some of them may be repurposed, but yeah, I think it's very atmospheric. We'll talk about the music in a moment here that really adds to it as well. Really sets the mood to the point where at the end I was like, could they do a Zack Snyder cut of this season in black and white? How would that look? Because I know there's also a difference between like something that is shot and were made to be in black and white and just like putting a black and white filter from Instagram over something that was made to be in color. Like the way you color things would be way different in if you were making the show in black and white, I'm sure, but or to be seen in black and white. So I don't know if that's a plausible idea or how good it would look, but I did have that thought. I was like, maybe they should try. Maybe that's an idea that could be explored in future seasons, doing like an entire episode in black and white for some reason, like if you did like a whole flashback episode or something. But
for sure.
But yeah, really, really, really neat. Really, again, just talk about setting a mood, setting a tone. Does a great job of that. I think the only other sort of actiony bit we didn't talk about is that scene where he goes and finds the fire inspector, strings him up by his ankle, and leaves him hanging in front of a train for a moment, an oncoming train, as he's trying to get a name out of him of who's been hitting Thorne and why are the police looking the other way. And it's a pretty good, it's some good classic Batman-y stuff. And again, kind of shows that he's not worried about. Like he's really just solely focused on people being afraid of him right now, which I think adds to that character. But that whole sequence where this guy, you really feel like this guy probably soiled his britches by the time he was done with it. But it's a really, that sequence is really stand out as well. And the shot again, which is used for the opening of him sort of peering around the chimney with the cape flowing, #cape movement in full effect in this series. Don't you worry. Yeah, I think that shot where he's kind of perched and he's like his posture's real weird in that. Like again, it's just like you said that they sort of wanted to explore this idea of a Batman who's more of a creature and isn't necessarily this, necessarily a great guy, at least not yet. So I think that even in his posture and the way they posed him in that shot, he looks terrifying. I think it's a really neat sequence.
Yeah, I know for time's sake, I'll just kind of go through a couple of highlights here. I think that the sequence where we're introduced to Batman, the fight sequence in the warehouse, I'm pretty sure one, if not two of the guys are cameos from the crew in a very similar situation in Mask of the Phantasm. On Bruce's debut, there's a guy, or maybe it's one of the guys is in the biker scene. He's like wearing like a pilot's hat almost. And that guy shows up. I'm sure there's going to be many, many, many different character cameos. And by cameos, I mean, they're going to be character designs that are based on previous character designs or look similarly, obviously, because the people that are responsible for this worked on Batman the Animated Series or Superman or Justice League. So we might get some repeat character designs here, or just a little nods to those original character designs. But I like that. I like seeing those. They're nice little Easter eggs. If you know, you know. I will also mention that there's a very famous, we're constantly comparing obviously this between Batman the Animated Series and this very famous picture that in the Batman animated collector's book of a drawing that Bruce Timm made as a joke of all of the things that they could not include in Batman the Animated Series. And it's got a kid being put in danger, glass breaking, guns shooting, people being shot, alcohol, drugs, nudity. Like, this is the hallmark of things that they were not allowed to include because of S&P. And I think everything except nudity was in this episode. So hat tip to the writers, directors, and Bruce Timm for finally getting to make the show that he always wanted to make, and kind of taking advantage of the fact that this is not on a Saturday morning's kids program.
Right. But to another point they made, while being able to have the freedom to do that, this is not a gory, over the top,
it's not Deadpool.
TVMA. It's not Deadpool, it's not Harley Quinn. This isn't, the point of it isn't, well, we can do it, so let's do everything in the first episode. It's just we don't have to worry about like, oh, we need to cut this frame because we see the fist contact, making contact with the face, or, oh, we can't show that much broken glass, or we can't show a firearm that's being fired towards the camera, or whatever. Any of those weird rules, like you said.
But to your point, like it did not feel like that they were abusing that. They show Bruce during his investigation, uncovering the box that has these bags of white something, but it's not like he goes cocaine, or like, he's not, it's
you
not
don't see anybody snorting it,
correct,
in the club or in the restaurant earlier, or whatever.
So
I think that is important. And you think about like the era that these guys, obviously they have a great love, as you mentioned, for Jack Kirby, James Tucker, certainly with a lot of influence with Dick Sprang on his personal art styles we've explored in Batman the Brave and the Bold. But when you think about when these guys were kids, when they were teenagers, it's the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams era of Batman, and it's like that era is like, to me, is like a perfect era of, yes, this is still a medium that ultimately is going to attract kids.
Right.
And so we don't want to make it too overtly adult in our themes or the things that we do, the violence we portray, but we don't have to treat it, it doesn't all have to be off screen, or, he's fighting space aliens with laser guns either. Like, we can imply a lot of this stuff or talk about it, and it doesn't mean that it's, not something that's suitable for a kid to watch or read in that case.
Yeah. Agreed. So for the sake of time, we'll move forward. I think, generally speaking, it looks okay. It'll take a little bit of probably getting used to. There are some good fight sequences that I enjoyed. The characters look strong. I do think there is some stiffness in certain portions. But overall, I ended up giving animation visuals a 6 out of 10. So I think that there's room to grow with the show. And I think as we get used to the art style and there's more interesting visual, things that go on, there might be higher scores, in our future here. But for now, I'm going with a solid 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just 1 point higher at a 7 out of 10. I think maybe more for, just like I said, the general visual atmosphere and the character designs and all that. Last bit I'll mention about visuals. There's a moment where Penguin is talking to Iggy, her right hand man, and she's sort of she's in like a robe, and you see like this wall of like wigs and different things, and she like hurls makeup behind her and it hits one of the wig holders or whatever. It's just like all these like weird, like she's like a little like Liza Minnelli or something in there too. Like she's a performer at the end of the day. So I just love, again, that's a credit to, again, some of the background artists as well as the character designers as well. So just a lot of fun little aesthetic things throughout this.
Definitely. And we'll have a lot more time to talk background art and some of the stuff that went into that on the rest of the month. So looking forward to talking more about that, perhaps in next episode. But for now, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. And Frederik Wiedmann, responsible for our soundtrack. And wouldn't you know it, much to our surprise, released the same day that the show came out on Amazon Prime for streaming. They released the entire soundtrack for season 1. And it was a joyous occasion, and much celebration was had because we could listen to the entire soundtrack in full without any sound effects or voices over top of it. So it's available now on your favorite music streaming service. Check it out. Well worth it. I think I think there's about 3 pieces, or an average of about 3 pieces per episode, or at least three musical numbers per episode that are available on the soundtrack. It works out to be. So there's 3 that are available that you can listen to from this episode. I guess we could start off, Liam, with the opening credits theme, which is a departure because it's not the Tim Burton Batman theme. It's not the Shirley Walker Batman theme. But I think what this show is going with the dark detective noir feel versus a kids show triumphant, we need a hero theme to play in all of our heroic situations, and Batman clearly kind of being this weird like tweener guy. The theme song that plays during the opening credits, which plays and is interwoven between some of the pieces throughout that first episode and some of the other episodes, it is just kind of this wandering, almost like a tragic type feel to it. And it's not quite the hero has arrived on the scene. It's more of, I feel like there's more mystery about it. It's strings, it's all, your classical orchestral music, but it doesn't have a lot of percussion. It doesn't have a lot of, cymbals or anything that come in to really drive home the excitement. It just kind of, the strings lay in there really well, and you kind of get some horns, and there are parts where it crescendos, but it really doesn't feel like it's quite a hero's theme. And that's not a knock on it. I think that fits well with what they're going for with this Batman in this phase of his Batman career, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it is a little meandering. It feels very, very film noir. Like, I almost kind of expected there to be somebody narrating our tales, because of the way it does kind of feel like maybe the music you would hear over a narration on like an old radio serial. Like when you're like someone's about to introduce a scene with the Shadow or something, which obviously Batman has a lot of the Shadow in his DNA. But so I was almost expecting that. Yeah, it feels very film noir, feels very evoking a certain era. But as far as like interesting percussion or anything, I didn't really pick up on it. It's a very string heavy score. We do know that this was a full orchestra score. This is not a digital score, which is really neat. Again, not something that happens very often anymore in animation, to my understanding, at least not with television. So exciting. It definitely it fits the atmosphere very well, but it doesn't have the personality, I would say, for the first episode at least.
Yeah, agreed.
We'll obviously treat it like a case by case basis over the next few weeks as we review individual episodes. But yeah, and there is a bit of a penguin theme, but again, it's very much an overture. It's certain, it's a sinister, sinister strings being played. Like, it's not really a over the top big band score with a lot of percussion or horns to really drive home the big action pieces.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think that it feels very cinematic, which is great. It feels great to have live orchestral music that's played. You can put the pieces on and listen to them, and they do sound interesting. There are parts that kick in with the more action-heavy sequences that seem to, of course, set the proper tone for what's happening visually. But I would say thus far for this episode, it's missing the gravitas of what we expect, or what we were used to, I should say, not what we expect, because I didn't know what to expect, but what you're used to with the Batman cartoon. So obviously those classic Shirley Walker pieces that are just memorable and bring you back to those particular episodes. I don't know that that's what the direction is going to be for this show. So I think it might take some time to adjust maybe or my expectations for things, or how we look at how the music is used and how it's used to, affect the scenes or properly provide more of a soundtrack. It is much more of a soundtrack, I feel like, than it is how we so often say that some of those episodes of Batman the Animated Series, that the music is a character itself. So, yeah, I don't hate the music. I think being able to listen to the pieces in isolation very much help it, because you can really pick out the pieces. I will say, I think for the first episode, it did feel like they went a little heavy on the music. There were less parts that felt like they breathed a little bit, which that's not our musicians' problem. They're doing what they're instructed to do. But I would say that for future episodes, I would look for hopefully a little more silence in places where the dialogue could breathe a little bit, which was a hallmark that we talk about for those original DCAU shows. So overall, I liked the music. I think it's fine. I think being able to hear them in isolation allowed me to appreciate it just a little bit more than I would if I had just tried to pick out the pieces under the dialogue. And I think that the Penguin and sort of the fight sequences, especially towards the end of that episode, there's some good stuff there. So I went with a 6 out of 10 for my musical score. What about you?
Yeah, I went with the exact same score of 6 out of 10. I think it's good. I think it does a good job, like I said, of setting the mood, but it does not stand out in a dramatic way like a classic Shirley Walker score. But again, as we mentioned, this episode's very dialogue driven, and there will be there's 9 more chances for that to be and again, a 6 is nothing to sneeze at. It's not a failing grade. It's a 6 out of 10 doesn't mean 660. Right. Like we said, it's just anything 5 or above we consider 5 about average, and then anything above that we consider pretty good to good to great. So pretty solid job. It sets the mood well, but nothing like super memorable either.
There you go. All right, Liam, let's wrap things up here with our final category of the day, and that is going to be introducing all the listeners to our lovely voice cast. Now, of course, we had an entire episode where we kind of discussed our thoughts on different people being cast, so we don't again, you can check that out. That was the last bonus episode that we did. So we'll of course give the proper credits to those involved with the show. So we certainly won't rob those involved with this episode from any proper due. But we'll talk about the episode's performance versus what we think of them being cast as the characters. If you want to hear that, check out the show notes, and we'll link to the episode where we talked about Hamish Linklater being cast as Batman, and Dietrich Bader being a part, and everybody else that's part of the cast. But let's go ahead and talk about this week's voice cast for this very first episode of Batman Caped Crusader.
Absolutely. So we'll go through here. First up, we have Cedric Yarborough. He's playing both Rupert Thorne and the judge in the trial scene. Folks might know him best from Reno 911. He's one of the cops on that show. Very funny guy, so it's funny to see him. Again, very small role, but he's obviously being set up as a recurring foe. So very, very sinister, but not much to him there. Playing both Aaron and Ronald Cobblepot, the two sort of sniveling, cowardly sons of the Penguin. Paul Scheer, who folks would probably know from The League and a few other things. Pretty funny guy. Definitely a guy, if you don't know the name, if you saw his face, you'd probably know him. But we kind of touched on this. Really funny. Like he talk about someone that maximizes their minutes. We get like the one scene where I think it's where Ronald is kind of hitting on Barbara, and then he spills on himself, and then the stuff with Bruce, which we talked about. And then it's kind of just that other scene of them sniping at each other when they're trying to figure out who the rat is. And I think but he's very, very funny. Like it's a good use of a comedic actor in this case. Like a again playing two voice, so he's arguing and accusing himself of being a rat. It's good fun.
Absolutely. Yep. I think they were, so far of the episodes that I have seen, my favorite side characters were these two guys. Very, very funny. Good performance, some good comedic relief, and you know, in the vein of being able to tell a serious story while still having some characters that are intentionally lighthearted and a little bit goofy. Him pleading and sort of as they're being chased by the Penguin's goons in the car chase scene, he's like apologizing. He's like, "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." And then like in the scene where he's or in that same scene, he's talking about why he decided to do this and how he's like motor mouthing 100 words a minute, and he's talking about how his mom was more of a monster than a mother and all this stuff. It's just this whole diatribe that he goes on as he's being shot at is just fantastic. Great performance from Mr. Schiff.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Great job by him. And some other background roles. We do have Grey DeLisle. I think she plays some of the party goers who accost Bruce Wayne upon his arrival. We do also have another familiar voice, John DiMaggio. He's the voice of Bullock, and does a nice job there. Jeff Bennett, another person we've talked about quite a few times, playing some of the other thugs, I believe. And then we actually start getting into some of our main cast here. We have Eric Morgan Stewart playing Commissioner Gordon. Not as much for him to do in this first episode, but you do get a little bit of establishing what I think is kind of considered, it's maybe old hat if you're a big Batman fan, if you've seen the movies or different comic runs over the years. He is already the commissioner. He's not like Captain Gordon or Sergeant Gordon at this point. But he's kind of one of the only good cops in Gotham, and he kind of remarks when he's at the party that most of the other cops in the room kind of are hoping that he fails, either because they want his job or because they think he won't play ball with our new mayor, potential mayor, as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes here. But I like him. He's just kind of stern, and he has a real, real stoic quality to him. But you get the sense, even that a little limited bit, that he's one of the few good apples in a rotten bunch.
Yeah. His interactions with Barbara, I think, are where we get to see most of his personality. He's going to play a big part in further episodes down the line. So not his episode to star in, but we certainly get the idea that he's really caught between political people that have political ambitions and their own purposes with Harvey's role, and these dirty cops that he's got to keep an eye on and try and figure out how he can root out. And on top of it, now he's getting pressure about this mass vigilante. So he seems cool, calm, and collected, but I have a feeling that it's a bit of a mask that he's putting on. So, not a ton for him to do for this episode, but I'm sure there's more down the line.
For sure. And speaking of some of the other movers and shakers in Gotham City, we do have a frequent topic of conversation on this show. Diedrich Bader, of course, has played Batman in another show before, as we've talked about several times. Also the voice of Zeta on the Zeta Project, a show that is DCAU canon, whether we like it or not. But yeah, he's, again, it's one of those ones where he has such a distinctive voice, but he is doing a really good job of playing like a real smarmy D-bag. Like you get the sense, really, and he only has the two scenes. He's on the boat for a minute, and he has the scene in the courtroom with Barbara, but you get that sense, like he's a real sleazebag here, and I thought a good job of being a bit of a chameleon for a man with a very, very distinctive voice.
Yeah, I agree. Like, we know that it's him, so of course, if you listen carefully, you can tell that it's him, but it's so very different than his Batman voice. It's different than his Zeta voice. It's not, I don't know what he's doing. He's not, it's just, I don't know, he's kind of pitching his voice up a little bit. But the way in which he delivers the lines is fantastic too. As you mentioned, he comes off as just being this gross guy. Like kids these days may say, he gives me the ick. It's just a testament to Mr. Bader's fantastic voice acting skill. And, we've talked about him enough times on as many episodes we've reviewed of Batman the Brave and the Bold, of course, the Zeta Project reviews that we've done. He's great. And here he gets to be kind of on the flip side of what we're used to, where we're used to him playing a hero or the main hero of a show. And here he's playing a diabolical, sinister, pun very much intended, dual identitied guy who's got this suave kind of macho manly facade that he's put up, but clearly his main goal is to move up in the political realm of Gotham, and he's really trying to figure out how he can manipulate and use the power that he has as the district attorney to get that next step and not afraid to keep a list of the people that have wronged him so that he can pay them back later. So yeah, a little bit diabolical, a little bit unlike what we're used to from Mr. Bader. So I like seeing this sort of darker, more intimidating, sinister side of him.
Absolutely. Like I said, really good job of him being a bit of a chameleon here. And one of the people he's playing off of is Crystal Joy Brown as Barbara Gordon, another actor that's done a fair amount of voice acting. Also had a role on the Equalizer TV series recently. She gets probably of this supporting cast. Like we said, they're introducing absolutely everybody here, even Flass and Bullock, as mentioned. But she's really the one that gets the most shine in this episode. So she kind of, other than our main villain, who we'll talk about in a moment, has a lot of the heavy lifting to do in this episode, both in an expositional sense and in a driving the plot forward sense. So I think she does a pretty solid job. Again, you get that sense that she isn't necessarily, she's not career minded. Harvey's trying to recruit her to work in the DA office because he sees how ferocious she is in defending her clients, and he wants her on her side, so wants her on his side as he runs for mayor. So I think they do a pretty good job of establishing kind of a baseline for Barbara right out of the gate as somebody who is very no nonsense, but also it's very clear that, like her dad, she has a real heart for the people of this city that a lot of these rich and powerful folks aren't really too concerned with. There's even a fun little bit, and this might go more into plot than directly into voice acting, but where Bruce Wayne, having escaped from being noticed in the cargo hold by diving into the water, comes back onto the ship, and she catches him. Like, he just pops up and she's just standing there, which again, I think, right, as we said, kind of points to this Batman not being, alert of everything at all times. He doesn't have magic detective vision that shows him where everyone is. And so he just tries to play it off, and then whatever the line he says, he then immediately says to two more people who see him, and you just see her kind of clock that of like, oh, this guy's super weird. Like, this guy's weird and fake. Like, he just said the exact same thing, the exact same tone of voice twice. And so I think we established that she's kind of, as we said at the end of the episode, is kind of figuring out her own opinions of Batman and some of the other players that are on the board here. But from there, we will get to our two big leads of this episode. Our villainous lead being Minnie Driver, very talented, very accomplished actor. She is Oscar nominated for Good Will Hunting. Has also done quite a bit in music, as well as evidenced by the song that she sings in her the little intro scene to the Penguin. It's not a full like 3-minute song, but it's she gets a little number here to show off the pipes. And then yes, she is our main villain. She's good. I feel like, again, because this version is a bit more sinister, it's a more understated Penguin than I'm used to. Like, she's not really an oaf. Like, she's portrayed as very capable and very sinister. But I think she pulls off those moments maybe a little bit better. There's not a lot of ha-ha with this version.
Yeah, the haha is happening around her. I think the two things that stuck out. I love the fact that they gave her a little musical performance. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome, as you pointed out. I loved her line of "Wow, Virginia, there really is a Batman," which of course is is a rip from "Wow, Virginia" or "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus" from Miracle on 34th Street. So she says that to her goons when Batman shows up to take them on at in the end battle. Her verbal sparring with Rupert Thorne is great, and that scene, as you mentioned, not only the animation and the gesturing that happens between them talking about an itty bitty bird, and told her, and then he comes back with the same thing. It's that verbal sparring back and forth is really great. The scene with her interrogating her two sons, and she's essentially the straight woman to the the two comedic relief guys in that scene. But we also get to see like the more diabolical, mean side of her, in as that scene progresses, where she's ruthless, and then interacting later on, where she's talking with Bullock over the phone, and where she's furious that Ronnie's gonna turn on her and go to the police. And so we really get to see a wide variety of her different emotions as the character. And obviously someone who's as accomplished as Ms. Driver is, it's probably not surprising that it shouldn't be surprising maybe that her performance comes across as someone who can act really, really well. But I think you and I both know from the 320 prior episodes, there are times where really, really strong, well-known actors try to do voice acting and have had mixed results in certain performances. So it's not always a slam dunk that because you're able to act well on film, that's going to translate well or the same over to voice acting. But in this case, I'd be willing to give Miss Driver a thumb up, because she certainly did very well in that performance.
Absolutely, she does a fantastic job. I thought, again, just very very sinister. I think the line that stands out to me is when she throws Aaron into the water. Her right hand man Iggy does, and he starts to sink, and she just goes, "Oh, he was my favorite." And then she turns to her other son. She's like, "I guess you're my favorite now." But she sounds so dejected by it. Like it's very cold and very understated in the delivery, but it's a very both sinister and funny line. So she does a good job of walking that tightrope there. A few other people that I think I forgot to mention: Gary Anthony Williams playing both Iggy the henchman and Detective Flass. And then we have Jason Watkins as Alfred Pennyworth, the portly Alfred, as we've talked about.
And it's funny, he is a very different relationship between Batman and Alfred than we are used to. It is not one that is warm. Yeah, it's not warm and friendly. Batman literally calls him by his last name in one of the interactions. He calls him Pennyworth, which I think was a little bit of a nod maybe to Sherlock Holmes, Watson. We get a little bit of Batman and Sherlock Holmes. But I also feel like it's a little bit of like disrespect. Like, this guy isn't like, he is my butler, he's not my friend, which is a very different dynamic than we're used to. He's not my father, he's not my friend, he's my employee.
Yes, that is what it feels like exactly. It very much feels like he's his boss, and not as it doesn't look at him the way that the Bruce of Batman the Animated Series looked at his Alfred. So an immediate point of difference that is evidenced both in Mr. Watkins' performance and, of course, in the performance of our lead as Batman, Hamish Linklater. We already sort of talked about our initial thoughts on the casting. He has done a lot of film and TV work, a lot of stage work as well. He brings a very sort of understated gravitas to his Batman, speaks very little, kind of just, and again, doesn't really speak in full sentences, which I think plays in this sort of absent-minded detective. Maybe that is kind of a Sherlock Holmes thing, like you said, when he's speaking to Alfred, he's just kind of doling out little bits of information about the case they're working on, or giving him an order, and then he gets to play a little bit more. I think he doesn't have the his voice doesn't go up too often. Obviously, it's hard not to just compare this Batman to the legendary performances of someone like Kevin Conroy or even Dietrich Bader, who again is also in this show. But I think his Bruce Wayne is pretty fun. Like we said, he very much not concerned with how people, like, he really seems to. It kind of feels like that first Christian Bale Batman movie. I feel like it kind of gets less and less by the last one, maybe. But that first one where he's like, no, I want to be seen in public as like a party boy idiot. Like, that's kind of what it feels like. And I can, and like the more kind of over the top and jerky I act, the more people will kind of just roll their eyes and not pay that much attention to what I'm doing. And then I can, and then he finds a reason to slip away and do his investigation. But it feels like this is he's sort of really, really playing that up and really playing a part, like, in a way that, whereas you felt like maybe the B-Task Batman, even with the put on voice, you still feel like, okay, that's an extension of who he really is. Just sort of played up, maybe more friendly, more outgoing than the real guy is. But this version is like, oh no, he is like a sociopath. Like, he flipped a switch, and when he gets on that boat, and he's just like, hey, where's a drink? Let's get, and then he's showing kind of holding court, telling a story about hanging out with a duchess or whatever. Like, he's just like, oh, okay, this guy has a real, like, he's really acting when he's Bruce Wayne in a way that even other Batman and other Bruce Wayne we've seen that have tried to make that distinction aren't, I think.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all, and I think that it makes. I think in one of those articles they were like, it's going to be hard to like Batman essentially because he's so weird, and that's what they're going for, right? He's like he's personified in a weird way. I think in the performance, I hear Kevin Conroy more in the Bruce Wayne than I do the Batman. And Mr. Linklater, as we mentioned in that bonus episode, said that he was sort of in his head mimicking the Kevin Conroy voice when he was performing, but then realized afterwards it didn't quite sound like, it didn't come out the way that he assumed that it did. I hear more of the Battinson Batman in the Batman voice, where it's very stoic, to the point, emotionless. It's not over the top gruff like the Bale Batmans, or even just kind of Ben Affleck doing a voice like we've seen with Batfleck. So I like it. I think by the time that I had watched a couple of more episodes, I had gotten used to it. It is a little jarring at first because visually he doesn't look all that different than the Justice League Batman with the way that he looks. So the late Kevin Conroy's voice not emanating from someone that looks visually similar to that character is a little bit, it takes you aback at first. But I think I've gotten used to it. I really like his Bruce Wayne voice, as you mentioned. I think it really drives home the point that what they have established for this, which was something that Kevin Conroy is, I think, credited with really establishing as far as the vocal performance, which is that Batman truly is the person and the Bruce Wayne is the mask, the facade. And that's what Bruce Timm wanted in that original performance from Batman the Animated Series, and they're carrying that forward here with that look. And when Mr. Linklater does when he's on the boat and that interaction that he has with Aaron first, where, like I said, where he calls him by the wrong name, I cackled. Just great. Because Aaron is so excited that he's in the presence of Bruce Wayne, and they've clearly had some sort of memorable interaction for Aaron before where he met Bruce, and then he introduces himself as Oswalda's son, hoping that that's going to jog Bruce's memory, and Bruce plays it off. It's like what I imagine most interactions with celebrities, if you meet them more than once, would be like. You're like, oh yeah, remember we met that one time? They're like, oh yeah. But then that you also include the dejecting part where he immediately, and I would say based on this character, purposefully forgets his name within 2 seconds and calls him the wrong name. is just so great.
And hands him his hat and coat.
Right. And says, hey, can you put these someplace? And like you said, then he's talking to Harvey and says, why don't we have drinks yet? He's being this socialite playboy. And then, as you mentioned, when he climbs out of the water in front of Barbara and he tells her the joke and she just no-sells it. But then he literally walks 2 feet and there's a couple of giggling girls and he tells the joke too and they like laugh at it maniacally. So good. So good. So yeah, I thought for an introduction to this version of this character, Batman, terrifying psychopath. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely comes across in that performance. Bruce Wayne being the, I really have to play this over the top and make sure that people, I'm blend in by standing out type of persona, absolutely came across in the scenes that we got with him as Bruce. So yeah, I really liked it. I really liked his performance as the overall. His interactions with Alfred, as we mentioned too, very interesting because he is rude to Alfred. Alfred tells him to have a good time at the party, jokingly, and he's like, was that a joke? Not having it, no sense of humor. Which is, going to be interesting, I think, for the rest of the show and somewhat jarring, as we said, based on what we're used to. But for all those reasons, Liam, I ended up giving, I think everybody works really well together on the first episode. Lots of good chemistry. I didn't think anybody struggled. I didn't think anybody stood out as a bad voice casting decision. Everybody seemed to be really comfortable in their roles. So I ended up giving voice acting an 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just 1 point lower, a 7 out of 10. Like everybody, like I said, I think there will be more good to come. Full disclosure, I've only watched the first 2 as of recording, so you're a little bit ahead of me, but I will definitely be catching up on more over this opening weekend here and coming back to it again when we review it over the rest of this month. But yeah, I think there's this is really good foundation. Like I said, that Batman and Alfred thing is really interesting because I just feel like so much of modern, especially in the actual comics themselves, has so leaned into the idea of the Bat family being like an actual family with Alfred as the grandfather and and Bruce as the dad, and to see them have this very cold, almost like I said, employer-employee relationship. Really interesting. So the way Mr. Linklater and Watkins play that, I think is my favorite part, along with Minnie Driver and her Penguin as well. So some really good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think typically we do in our DCAU reviews for our standard and even our Elseworlds tales for stuff that's been a little bit older, we talk about rewatchability. Harder certainly to gauge a brand new show that's been out for less than a couple of days here at the time of first airing of this show. As far as rewatchability, we're going to come back to it. Technically, I watched the episode twice, so I guess you could say that that's an endorsement for rewatchability. I did that because I wanted to watch it without critically analyzing it, and had to go back for the actual review. But I would say, as far as a recommendation, yes, I liked this episode, and it's a fine introduction to the series, as you just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I know they talked about that in some of the interviews leading up to it. They want these episodes to, you don't have to necessarily watch them in order. You can just kind of pick one and watch it if you like. It very much works as a standalone thing. Obviously, there are crumbs also, like we said, a lot of introduction for who these versions of the characters are and are going to be. So there is some heavy lifting for the series as a whole, for sure. But it's like just a standalone adventure where Batman, does a little investigating and then has a fight with the Penguin. Yeah, it's a fine little self-contained adventure, for the most part as well. So it works on both levels.
There you go. Recommendation: watch episode 3 before you watch episode 5, though, because there's characters that whose stories may or may not be affected by that episode. So that's the only one that I would recommend that I've seen thus far that you would want to watch in some sort of order. But yeah, as far as like which ones you watch in order, I like that you can kind of jump around a little bit if you wanted to and feel like it's kind of self-contained. But all right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap things up. So let's total up our final scores for this week's very first episode of Batman Caped Crusader. Totaling up my scores, I end up with a 27 out of 40. What about you?
And I'm just a couple points lower at a 25 out of 40. Yeah, I think the good solid opening outing, and we'll see if our scores get higher as the month goes on.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll begin to wrap things up here. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. If this is your first time tuning in, we thank you for checking us out, and we appreciate the support in listening. We invite you to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. New episodes drop every Saturday, and as we mentioned at the top, we typically review classic DC Comics cartoons, mostly the DCAU, but we do spin off into Elseworlds, as we call them, talking all kinds of DC animation. We've done lots of other of the shows that have occurred after and before, in some cases, Batman the Animated Series. So subscribe to us, go back. Our shows are evergreen. Check them out, jump around a little bit, and let us know what you think. If you like the podcast, once you check us out, leave us a 5-star review and let us know. That'll help us a lot. If you like the podcast, a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, Apple or Spotify, certainly helps us out a lot. And I know that both Spotify allows you to leave specific comments per episode now. So if you liked this, if there were things that you liked or didn't like about the very first episode of Batman Caped Crusader, give us some feedback. And by the way, show your work. Don't just say, why is Penguin a woman? Give us a little more than that if you can. We'd love to talk with you. You can also, of course, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and if you leave a nice little review there with a blurb, and you're within the continental United States, we'll send you a little thank you gift just for leaving a little blurb there. So we greatly appreciate that. You can also support the podcast by subscribing to us on your favorite platform of choice when it comes to social media. We're at DCAU Review on Twitter/X and Instagram. You can check us out on there. We love talking with people. We got a lot of conversation this week. We're going to be talking all month long about Batman Caped Crusader, but we also talk all kinds of DC comics and everything else involved with DC animation. So follow us and chat along with us there, or slide into our DMs and on Instagram and let us know what you thought about this episode. Check out the show notes if you want to support the podcast too. There's a couple ways to support us there. There's our store, as well as a link to support the podcast directly as a monthly supporter. We have several supporters that do that on a monthly basis, and we're so humbled every time that those donations hit. So we thank you for helping us feel like we're doing something okay here by doing so. So we thank our monthly supporters. Liam, it's not hard to say what we're going to be reviewing next week, or hard to guess, as we continue here all month long with Batman Caped Crusader, as we look towards episode 2 coming up next week.
That is right, Cal. So it'll just be episode 2 of the series, as one might expect, as we're kicking off with the first 4. So next week we will be reviewing And Be a Villain, which will feature this show's take on Clayface, and quite a bit different than the version you may be used to if you're only familiar with him from the animated series or video games, or certainly the Harley Quinn animated series. Quite different, this take, but we'll talk about it next week. Some Golden Age roots to it. So excited to get into that next week.
Absolutely. Can't wait for that one. Going to be a blast. Until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll catch you on the next episode of the DCAU Review. Bye-bye.